Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for watching. This video is sponsored by Viviva Colorsheets. This is actually a really unique product that you've probably seen around the art YouTuber scene lately. But it's basically a little booklet full of watercolor pigments stuck on paper. In the back of the book, there's also this little mixing palette sheet that you can attach, and they also have the option to personalize this really cute wooden case with your name, and it's just a really neat little idea. So I haven't tested these before, and I'm going to be testing these with you for the very first time. They sent me this water brush along with the little palette of paper, and I've already gone ahead and swatched out all of the different colors that you can see here. Now, even though using a water brush is not my favorite thing ever, I'm gonna use it for this video anyways because I thought the whole idea of this little set is that it's perfect for travel, and bringing a water brush along when you travel is just a really handy idea. Now, if you want to see my video on comparing a water brush to a regular watercolor paintbrush, I will link that above in the cards. My first impression of these colors is that they are extremely pigmented and extremely bright. To be honest, these aren't normally colors that I paint with. I always prefer much more muted tones and earthy tones. So in the next little example that I'm going to be painting, I'm going to kind of test it with a more earthy illustration, and you'll see how that's gonna turn out. But for this one, I decided to just go with a couple wildflowers because they were bright and yellow, and I thought those would be the best bright colors to test out first. Now, once again, using a water brush is not my specialty, it's not my favorite, so the results of these paintings definitely need to take that into account. I will be sharing a third piece in this video where I do switch to my normal brushes just to test that out and give it a fair chance as well. Okay, so another thing I have to mention is that these are not your typical watercolors. These colors are more of a dye, ink-based color, and being more of a dye does allow them to be a lot more vivid than watercolors. So if you are looking for something super bright, if you have tried working with inks before, I think that you would really like these sets. If you are not familiar with painting with dyes and inks, this may take a little bit of getting used to, like it did for me. I decided here to try the little mixing palette. It really is just a piece of paper with a more glossy finish on it. So it's nice that it's there for travel purposes, but I would actually prefer to do the mixing in a separate little tray or container. Because this is a dye, your hands are going to pick up that pigment. So let's try something else now. I'm just going to freehand a little fawn. And the first thing that I noticed in this palette was that there weren't really any brown or neutral shades. There is a burnt umber, but it's definitely more of an orangey shade. So I kind of had to mix my own brown just using a couple of the primary colors. I really hope that Viviva will make more neutral-based palettes in the future. I think that would be really fun, just for those of us who don't like to use vivid colors all the time. But I'm still sticking with that water brush. I'm being a trooper, I'm using it. I do find that these pigments dry a little bit quicker than normal watercolors, and that might tend to make your colors maybe not blend as you want them to. But overall, I found them fairly similar to watercolor in the way that they apply and the way that you can kind of adjust the transparency with the amount of water that you use. I did go in here with my fine little brush because I was not trusting that water brush to be able to do this job. You can see that the brown shade that I mixed up, it's even still a little bit orangey. So yeah, I really do wish that there was more of a brown shade in there, a more neutral brown or something along those lines. As well as maybe a more muted pink, because the pink that is there is more of a magenta and it is more bright and purpley. Again, that's just something that I'm not really used to. It's totally personal preference. I just decided to go in with my white gel pen here to create some of the final details. So here's my really fast, kind of messy little freehand deer, and you can see that my hands are pretty messy with ink, and you do have to use soap and water to get it off. So maybe just keep that in mind, because I didn't have that in mind at all when I started. So keep that in mind, and if you need to, wear a glove. All right, so I wanted to give this a fair shot using my normal watercolor brushes. So I decided to start by wetting the entire paper and then going in with that slate black color. Again, this was one color that I wish there was a more pigmented shade of. The black, when you don't use a lot of water, it is really nice and pigmented, but when you are adding it to a wet surface, it does dilute it quite a bit. I just used one of the blue shades, Peacock Blue and Viridian Hue here, and I'm following that up with a couple of yellow and orange shades. I wanted these to all blend together seamlessly, so I did find that as they dried a little bit, I was able to use a more dry brush and just kind of really lightly sweep that over the gradient seams or where the colors match together. So that was kind of helpful, being able to blend those without using water. However, I did find that when going back over it, because I wanted to darken that black and that blue a little bit more, it did re-wet the inks below and kind of start to melt them together again. Again, that's totally normal with different watercolor paints as well, depending on brand. I just thought because it was a dye-based pigment, it would have a little bit more staying power. But I did think that these would become a little bit more vivid as I layered them, and they really didn't. They were already pretty vivid as they were, and they weren't really getting any more vivid the more layers that I added. So I've just created this sort of gradient background, and I decided to fill it with some silhouettes of palm trees. So I'm using a finer tipped brush here, and I'm just creating some really easy palm trees. These are so simple to do. You basically just start with your main leaf stem and then do the finest little strokes coming off of it, kind of like a feather. I don't really know what I was thinking here by adding a big tree in the foreground. Honestly, the positioning of all these trees is a little bit off, but I'm just testing things out here, not too concerned about composition. So I don't know, I think it looks a little funny, but in the end, I think it worked out, and I was able to test all of the colors and everything how I wanted to. I did apply a little masking fluid there to that moon at the top, which you'll see me taking off shortly. But overall, I did find this way easier to use with my normal paintbrushes and a glass of water. I was able to control the pigmentation once again as I do with watercolor paint. That's really my main issue, I think, with water brushes, is that I don't have much control. So I'm just grabbing some white gouache right now and going over that moon, and then I'm going to add a few splatters using the same gouache and a fluffy brush. All of the products, by the way, as always, are always listed below in my description box. I'm just going in again now with that white gouache on my little paintbrush here and filling in some of those areas that I covered up with the tissue. Okay, so final thoughts on the Viviva Colorsheets. I think this is a really cool idea for travel, definitely. I like how pigmented everything is. Definitely easier to use with paintbrushes. I only wish there was a more neutral shade palette. I also wish that they weren't so messy, and I found that holding open each sheet was a little bit awkward when you're trying to paint. If you guys like the video, please give it a big thumbs up. It really helps me out, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.